Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and this time I've got a full preview for you on the brand new Tier 10 American light tank, the Sheridan. This vehicle has the choice of two competitive guns, 105mm similar to that of the M48A1 pattern, and also the derp gun, the 152mm howitzer, a lot like on the KV2 that a lot of you will have been used to having played the T49. This video will let you know everything there is to know about the brand new Tier 10 American light tank, showcase both guns of the vehicle with gameplay, and I'll give you my opinion which one I personally prefer. And if you have no interest in playing the Tier 10 Sheridan, then I'll let you know some tips and tricks as to how to deal with them, as they're undoubtedly going to become increasingly popular over the next few weeks. So firstly, let's see how the two guns on the Sheridan compare, with the one on the left having the 105mm and the one on the right using the 152mm. I'm going to compare the Sheridan as well to the brand new Tier 10 Untitled Panzerwagen, the German light tank, and also its direct competition in the form of the Tier 10 American medium tank, the M48A1 pattern. So immediately we notice that the DPM of the 152mm looks exceptionally higher than the 105mm, and that's because the high explosive rounds on this 152mm pack a punch. They do 910 damage if you manage to penetrate. And that's a big if, because on the standard rounds you have 76mm of penetration, and on the premium rounds you have 85mm of penetration. And of course, considering this is a Tier 10 vehicle, you are only going to be meeting Tier 8 to Tier 10 tanks, and trying to use 76mm of high explosive penetration to go through them can be tricky. However, that's not the only type of ammunition on this 152mm gun. You can also use heat rounds. Now, these aren't exceptionally expensive. In fact, if I show you here, the heat rounds on this vehicle cost 770 per shot. That's only 20 more than the high explosive rounds. And these heat rounds have pretty much double the penetration of the standard high explosive ammunition with 152, and now that is enough to go through a lot more plates than the 76mm of high explosive. But do keep in mind that high explosive rounds will still damage the target even if they fail to penetrate. And this 152mm derp gun with high explosive will deal still about 150 damage to the thickest armor in the game, like an IS-7 turret. And against most medium and light tanks, you're probably doing about 300 to 500 damage, even if you fail to penetrate. Of course, the heat rounds, on the other hand, with their 700 alpha damage, will either go in or bounce and not do that middle amount of damage that the high explosive rounds would. But of course, these rounds are completely situational, and I love the heat rounds on the T49 and also now on the Sheridan for taking out tanks with about 500 to 700 hit points. These heat rounds, however, certainly do lower the DPM output of the vehicle as you increase the penetration. Now it's down to 2,100, which is less than the Untitled Panzerwagen, significantly less than the 105, and a whopping amount less than the M48. So how about the 105mm on this tank? Well, it's got 2,347 DPM, which is nearly 200 higher than the German vehicle, but it is 20% less than the M48A1 pattern, so this isn't going to be a pure damage class, a lot like the medium tanks are. One thing you'll have to watch out for as well with this vehicle is 236mm of penetration on its standard APCR rounds. Now, 236mm of penetration certainly limits the light tank role at penetrating mid to thick armor at high tiers. For example, I wouldn't feel comfortable shooting at the front of an E75 with a Sheridan. But of course, there is the option to damp that 2-key and fire heat ammunition, which has 280mm of penetration. And that should be enough to contest pretty much anything that you're going to be firing at least half the time. Now, one thing I must mention is that this 105mm gun has a rather unique alpha damage, 360. That's because Wargaming nerfed the Tier 10 light tanks from 390 to 360 alpha damage for the 105mm. And so do keep that in mind when you're fighting against a Sheridan, that if you've got about 400 hit points, whereas a Tier 10 medium tank might be a 50-50 to kill you, you can probably take a hit most times out of 10. And of course, if you're playing in any of the Tier 10 medium tanks, you will have a significantly better rate of fire than it, of course, unless you're playing in an E50M. One thing that's lovely about the Tier 10 light tanks is the shell velocity has increased a lot over the Tier 9 vehicles. It's now up to 1,200 on your standard rounds. Of course, that can't compete with the Tier 10 medium tanks, and so you're going to have to give a little bit more lead, especially at long ranges. But it certainly is a great feeling, and the 105mm gives you a massive advantage over the 152mm at mid to long ranges. And one thing that's quite nice about the Sheridan is it does carry 37 rounds, which is 7 more than the Untitled Panzerwagen, So in those kind of games which are very long-winded, maybe you ricocheted a few shells, you might be running out in the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, which can never do more than 10,800 damage without fires, ammo racks, or very good RNG, of course. Whereas the Sheridan is capable of over 13,000 potential damage. So what about the weapon handling for the Sheridan? Well, with the 105mm, it's got an awesome 1.7 seconds aim time, which is better than the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen and also the M48A1 pattern. But the accuracy falls back. 0.4 accuracy is not very good at all. In fact, that's worse than any of the tier 10 medium tanks in the game, significantly worse than the Panzerwagen, and of course its medium tank rival, the M48. One thing that is absolutely lovely about this tank, however, is the turret traverse dispersion. It is 0.05, and so that means that you can snap shots in this tank with ease. And that's certainly something that you cannot do if you want to use the derp gun, because look, the turret traverse dispersion is 8 times worse than with the 105mm, and of course you have 0.53 accuracy and 3.3 seconds aim time. But a passing mention should be made that the performance of the 152mm is way better on the Sheridan than it ever was on the T49, and so if you loved the T49 derp gun, then this might be the light tank for you. Depression wise, this tank is incredible. 10 degrees is better than the M48 by 1 degree, and it's the same as the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen. That should allow you to easily work ridgelines like a total boss. So now onto the mobility of the Sheridan, and this is where you would expect a tier 10 light tank to be exceptional, and it kind of is. 65 kilometers an hour forwards and 22 backwards. That is certainly as fast as the fastest medium tanks in the game. But of course, it can't quite compete with the Panzerwagen at 75 kilometers an hour and 25 backwards. But it totally smashes the slowest tier 10 medium tank in the game, the M48A1 pattern, which is limited to 45 forwards. And the Sheridan makes its medium tank rival look really sluggish. Next, we should look at the power to weight ratio of this tank. It is over 41. That is utterly incredible, and when you consider that this vehicle gets the same ground resistances as the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen and the M48, this truly can accelerate up slopes at its maximum speed. But of course, this power to weight is just a little bit less than the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, and so if you're looking for a tier 10 light tank that is ludicrously fast, you might want to go for the German vehicle. So now moving on to the armor of the Sheridan, and it's not exactly good news. 14mm at the front, 31 at the side, 12 at the rear, 38 on the front of the turret, 15 and 15. When we look at this in a model viewer, we can clearly see that you are pretty much going to get overmatched by anything that shoots this tank. And there's only one tiny advantage that Sheridan has. Remember the visual model, we can see that there's some kind of spaced armor over the front here. And maybe indeed this will help you a little bit. We can see there's a whopping 3mm of spaced armor over this part of the vehicle. So this might save you from a high explosive round, but it's certainly not going to save you from armor piercing or APCR rounds. And really, to all intents and purposes, your tank is going to be matched with every single shot that hits your vehicle. You're going to be losing health, and it's incredibly frustrating to lose your tracks and get overmatched in your tier 10 lights. But I guess that's what the new rechargeable repair consumable is for, and of course you are sacrificing all of your armor to be able to gain that increased mobility. Hit points wise, 1600 is the same as the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, but of course the light tanks can't compete with the M48 with its hit points and also its armor, which looks incredible compared to the Sheridan. So how about the view range of the Sheridan? Well, it's 420 meters, which is awesome. That's as good as the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen and also the tier 10 American medium tank, the M48A1. And this allows you to get up to an exceptional view range even without coated optics when you have a reasonably skilled crew. And until you have that skilled crew, coated optics can get you up to 500 meters view range in this tank, which is enough to see even pretty well camouflaged tanks right up until that 445 meters maximum spotting distance. But you know what? I think that's quite enough theory crafting. Let's see how it performs in some gameplay. Firstly, with the 105mm, and then I'll follow it up with the 152mm. So rolling out on airfield in the Sheridan. Now before I start the commentary on this replay, I must highlight a couple of things. That this is the unnerfed Sheridan. I didn't have time to manage to get onto the second stage of the test server to be able to test the tank with the nerfs. Now, what do you need to know? Well, my version of the tank right now has 390 alpha damage, but the version that's currently on the live servers that everyone has access to has 360 alpha damage as I compared in the statistics. So please keep that in mind, that every shot that you see that goes in this replay will effectively be doing 30 less. So that shell should have done 365 in the current version of the game, for example. And also this tank has 430 meters base view range, whereas the Sheridan on the live server has 420, as I showed in the statistics. Now, I put a round at the T100 LT there, and you saw that his frontal armor managed to ricochet. Now, in the unnerved T100 LT, that will have 100 millimeters of frontal hull armor, and that really will start to contest the 236 millimeters of penetration this tank has. And that's something that you should consider if you're thinking about, should I get a medium tank? Should I get a light tank? And I'm sure that's what a lot of people are thinking. That your light tanks just don't quite have that clout in the penetration to be able to go through the thickest plates. But when you do have the side armor of light tanks like we have against the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen and the T100 LT, then you really can start to beat them up. So we lose our ammo rack, and I believe our track there from the AMX 50B. That one entered the side. This thing does get ammo racked quite a lot, like all American tanks, so watch out for that. And I must pause the replay here actually to show you another thing that's rather annoying. So that was pretty much an overmatch. I don't know how that actually tracked me as well. I guess it was just above the track from the AMX 50B. But the shell that you just saw enter the tank was down here from the IS-7. And this is what very thin armor can be so annoying for. Now that shell is so well angled that it would have ricocheted if the caliber of the gun of the IS-7 was not 3 times the thickness of the Sheridan's lower plate armor. So not only did it enter the vehicle, it exited the vehicle, I guess, and also took the track off on the other side. And that can be incredibly annoying. If I'd been in a medium tank in that position there, I would have probably bounced that IS-7 shell. That certainly isn't the case with the Sheridan, and you are going to have to use those 1,600 hit points as if it's the last thing between you and the garage, which, thinking about it, it really is, but it kind of is in all other vehicles. But what I'm trying to highlight is that it's so much more important to be aware of how many hit points you have and to really think about trading them effectively when every shell that hits your tank pretty much is going to be overmatching the vehicle. So this is one of my favorite kind of positions to get to in my aggressive medium tanks, and will be for my tier 10 light tanks as well. Working up onto this position here allows you to extend view range all along there, and with the 10 degrees of gun depression that this vehicle has, you can just whip around and provide supporting fire on most of the map. So we're unable to penetrate the side of the T110E4's turret there. Again, maybe that's the APCR rounds with 236 millimeters of penetration failing to do so. But you're going to have to get used to that in your tier 10 light tanks. You don't have the accuracy of the medium, you don't have the alpha damage of the medium anymore, you don't have the rate of fire of the medium, and you certainly don't have the penetration of the medium tanks. These are kind of about 70-75% of the combat capacity of your mediums, but you just need to work out whether it's worth sacrificing that 25% combat capacity to be able to gain the mobility. And I guess it was here. If I'd been in the M48, I might not have been able to rush up into this position. But in the Sheridan, I just made it look so easy. And once you've got up here, you can just be absolutely dominant. And some of the slower medium tanks couldn't have been able to get up here so easily. This is one of my favorite moments of this replay. Yeah, I just play for a bit of fun sometimes, guys. I nearly squished 2 tier 10 heavy tanks there with a tier 10 light. I would never recommend doing that in one of the most lightly armored and also light vehicles in the game. But you know what? If I could have had a double Goomba there on top of those 2 tier 10 heavies, then that would have been hilarious. And we nearly did as well. We kill the IS-7 by jumping on top, and we nearly get the 50B as well. But now we have a position against an E100. Now I shoot at his tracks. It doesn't look like we were able to take the tracks off, however. And now I'm going to be loading the heat rounds here to see if we can penetrate the lower plate. The E100 misses me. That would have been my death. And we put a round up through his engine deck there by the looks of it, right through the top. And remember, these heat rounds, 280 millimeters of penetration, will penetrate all angles of armor up to, I think, about 85 degrees. What was that? Did that E100 or the mouse just TK the E50M? Doesn't look like he likes him very much. Maybe he really wants to kill this E100, but I'm thinking the same thing. Can't quite find the shot there. We go right through the side there. I'm quite surprised that heat round went in, considering I think I went through the spaced armor of the E100 there. But we manage it anyway, and now we're going to be accelerating as quickly as we can towards, it looks like, an AFK TVP. And just look at that aim time. The aim time in this tank is utterly fantastic. It is shoot and scoot and shoot and scoot, and I'm sure that a lot of people are going to love that gameplay, and I will too when I get my hands on this tank on the live server. I just really wish it had been like this Chrysler tier for that 390 105mm alpha damage. But oh well, what are you gonna do? So we're loading a high explosive round here at the end of the game. Will we manage to penetrate the bat chat? 15558. Yeah, there we go. 5 kills. What a tear of a round here for the Sheridan. But before we take a look at the post-game stats for this 105mm, I think it's about time to whack on that bigger gun. So, bigger gun indeed, this 152mm. Let's see how it performs on one of my favorite light tank maps on mines. If I can get to the hill, of course, these medium tanks slowing me down. Well, if I don't manage to claim the hill at the beginning, we'll know who to blame. Now, this gun, you know, it's like putting a KV-2 in a room with a bulldog and seeing what the result is. And the result is the Sheridan. And oh dear, that T100 LT decides to stop. I shoot the AMX 13105 and the T100 LT has already been destroyed. We just did 662 damage to the AMX 105, but my Rheinmetall Panzerwagen doesn't look like he's got quite used to his tank yet, or the speed of it. And the artillery shell that hits there manages to stun my crew and also damage my tank. And even though we help out that Rheinmetall Panzerwagen to try and get him back into the fight, the artillery shut him down. And look, another artillery shuts a Rheinmetall Panzerwagen down on the enemy team. You know, fair enough, they've nerfed the penetration of those artillery, but they're still just as deadly against light tanks. And I've seen so many one-shots on the test server during my play. So we're going to get penned again by another IS-7. What is up with these IS-7s penetrating our tank? I don't even turn my turret towards him because I want to focus on killing the tier 10 German light on the enemy team. And there we go, right into his butt with a high explosive round. Goodbye, sweetheart. So now I turn my attention to the Bat Chatillon on the other flank. And you can see what kind of an impact you can have with this vehicle. Look how much spotting we've dealt. Look how much damage we can deal if, of course, you shoot lightly armored vehicles. And, of course, the AMX 13105 and the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen are one of them. Now, I see a Panzer 7. I see an IS-7. Why would I shoot them when I can shoot the Sheridan? 952 damage done. The 10 degrees of gun depression, the better aim time, the better accuracy, the better rate of fire on this gun, it just feels like a better T49. And I feel like this 152mm is just lovely. So an AMX 13105 is coming after me on top of the hill. There we go, have 984 damage. See you later. And oh wait.
We're done for. Everyone get out.
Yeah, while this is probably one of the most dangerous mobile derp guns in the game, yeah, the Type 5 Heavy still holds an absolute monster. His high explosive premium shell entering my vehicle, that could have done 1,400 damage. It would have killed me in a single shot. Of course, that was absolutely unnecessary, however. But even though we lived for exactly 2 minutes in that game, we were able to do 3,000 damage, finishing second on damage, third on experience, I guess, for the little bit of spotting we dealt. And I guess it's a case of live by the sword, die by the sword, right? When you're playing this kind of vehicle. Yeah, don't mess around with Type 5 heavy high explosive rounds, even when you're using the 152mm on the Sheridan. One thing that is quite nice about the 152mm, however, is the ammunition cost is not very expensive at all, and unless you start firing premium rounds, you will actually make decent amounts of credit playing the Sheridan, of course, if you're able to do this amount of damage in your games. However, the result on airfield with the 105mm was a little bit more impressive. We get a Pascucci's medal for killing 2 self-propelled guns on the enemy team. It used to be 3, now it's 2 requirement. We get 1,103 base experience points, pretty much half what anyone else was able to achieve. 4,200 damage, again, 50% more damage than anyone else was able to achieve, along with our 5 kills, and we fired a few premium rounds there, but still make 20,000 credits profit. There's no doubt that in my eyes, the more consistent gun on the Sheridan is going to be the 105mm. But situationally, you can do really, really well with that 152mm. And a lot of people will enjoy consistently doing damage to enemy heavy tanks that you otherwise probably couldn't penetrate with the 105. But personally for me, when I do have the pleasure of getting my hands on the Sheridan, I will be using the 105mm on it, as I do think it's going to be the most competitive gun. But I'll probably put the 152mm on it a few times at least to have a little bit of hilarity on stream. So all in all, what is my opinion on the Sheridan? Well, I think it's a good tier 10 light tank. But my opinion is still that the tier 10 light tanks just don't quite have the clout to justify taking them and losing all of that armor, losing all of the weapon handling to be able to gain a little bit of camouflage rating when you're on the move and also some mobility. But nevertheless, if that doesn't matter to you and you have no interest in playing mediums and you just want your tier 10 lights, then the Sheridan certainly might be the one for you. It has the best DPM, incredible gun handling, best in-game view range, and enough mobility to call it at least a high-tier light tank. And I'm sure that the flexibility to have 2 competitive guns on the vehicle will make it a rather popular tank. So hopefully you enjoyed this preview, or maybe you just like me trying to kill 2 tier 10 heavy tanks from above with a single flop. If you did, please consider giving it a like, I'd really appreciate it. And let me know in the comments down below what you think about the Sheridan. How does it stack up to tier 10 light tanks, and how does it stack up to tier 10 medium tanks? And what is going to be the first tier 10 light tank that you're going to be going for on the live server, and why? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.